All right. Welcome everyone. A very good evening to all of you. This is only the third book discussion of our book club, and today's book that is going to be discussed is called Nagasaki by Eric Faye, and we have with us our guest speaker today, Dr. Vidya Premkumar, who took out her time. And the past week discussions with her on the book, the themes that needs to be discussed, and I'm grateful to you, ma'am, for having this session with us. Thank you. Um, Dr. Vidya Prem Kumar is an assistant teacher of English in at Mithibai College, and she also writes her blog called Reading Time with Vidya. And the book Nagasaki was basically suggested by her for our readers to read. So, ma'am, welcome. And if there's anything you'd like to share before the session starts, please feel free.
Okay, so since this is a book club, I'll keep my commentaries to the least because I want people to actually talk about the book. And since everybody has read it, I would prefer more people to talk about it, and then I could put in insights wherever needed. Okay, so I will probably just talk briefly about the book and probably a little more about the Japanese culture that it comes from and why the concept of alienation and all this is so uniquely portrayed in the book. And point out maybe a few areas that we could all take up for discussion because it's basically a discussion. So I don't want to hog the entire time. I want people to actually talk about what they felt when they read the book. Before we start off on the onset itself, one of the things that I want to ask all of you is how many of you felt a kind of disquieting feeling coming to you when you read the book? How many of you felt slightly disturbed when you read the book?
Well, I really felt disturbed because of the intrusion in your private life. If I would have been there at the place of Shimura-san, I would have felt violated because somebody's there at my house. I don't even know for a year, and when I come to know, I don't feel that my home is my home anymore. So it's something which makes person feel vulnerable about their whole life and their whole state. So I was disturbed.
Yeah, okay, so that's one point that disturbed you. Did any other aspect of the novel disturb anybody else? Anybody else from the audience who have read the book and felt
Uh,
disturbed by something else? Yeah.
Good evening to everyone, and I really look forward to knowing more about the Japanese culture insight from you. Also, speaking about how the book actually gave a very kind of eerie and a disturbed feeling towards the end. Also, along with that, I started looking at certain people with a different kind of outlook. So that I felt while I was reading the book. As it is a short book, I tried to finish it in one sitting, but somewhere deep down there it did feel like a heavy weight. The book felt like a heavy weight. So that is something that I would like to share.
Okay. All right. So a couple of aspects that have come out is one, the differing aspects, and two is the violation of private space. That's something that may have led to many people feeling, unsafe and insecure about how you feel about being safe in your own home. The concept of space, the concept of rooting and feeling at home, and then knowing that somebody has violated and you are not even aware of it for an entire year, and therefore not feeling at home anymore. Okay, so I'm so sorry. Japanese culture.
Hello.
I think ma'am's connection is disrupted. Before that, I would like to ask, I'd like to request every one of you to please mute your mics so that there's no disturbance when the person is speaking. And when you have to speak, please unmute your mics. Thank you.
sorry, I lost connection there. I lost connection there. So yeah. So one of the things that is very strongly prioritized in most of the South Asian countries like Japan or Korea and all these places is the fact that your professional life takes precedence over any other life. So at professional level, if you ever say no to going out with your colleagues or hanging out with your colleagues, it's considered as an isolation that you are enforcing upon them. So everybody who's a part of a team is expected to actually step out and go out and socialize even after work hours. So most people do not actually have social friends. What they have as social friends are generally the work culture based friends only, because most of them put in more than 12 hours of work at offices, and after that when you are probably socializing, it's again with your colleagues, and most people go back home isolated. And more, I mean, since almost 90s, Japan has become a country where the younger youth population has dropped dramatically and the older population is much higher. So again, that has also led to a different kind of isolation and alienation that has set in this society. And all of these factors are also affecting, and more people are choosing actually not to leave home. There are stories that have come out of the Japanese, culture, which have talks about people who have not left home for 3 years, not even stepped out of the house. They order everything online, they work from home, and they do not step out. So this is a different kind of isolation, that is self-enforced isolation, where people are not even meeting other people. And you have stories which tell even, women who are prostitutes being hired to actually teach young men how to date women. That's the kind of social isolation that we are talking about. And these two older generation people who are a part of that culture, the isolation is not very surprising, the alienation is not very surprising in that particular story. This particular story was actually based on a real life story, I mean incident that took place, and which was reported in 2006 in a newspaper in Japan. And Eric Faye himself is a journalist, so he picked up the story, and then he kind of looked at the entire ontological aspect of it, the sense of alienation and isolation and human relations that are formed also. Because in unraveling of his entire life, Kobo's life, what also happens to him in the entire story is also, by the coming of this woman, it's not just the sense of the security that he felt, the sense of safety that he felt within his home that is challenged. It also challenges him to get out of the fog of isolation that he had, self-isolation that he had pushed himself into, and re-examine his own relationships. So he even thinks about his previous relationships with women which didn't successfully stay. He says he was himself responsible for those relations not working out. And he thinks about his parents, he thinks about his sister who hasn't come to visit him for over a year, which is the reason why he didn't find out this woman who was staying with him for an entire year. So you have all these fraying relationships being re-examined in that light. So that is why the home no more feels home. It's not just simply the sense of security that is taken away. It's also the sense of now you having to self-reflect and think about your own life and what it has been. So it is becoming uncomfortable with one's own self also, which kind of is what leads him to go out of it, I mean to move out of that house, because now no more can he feel safe in it. And just like he can no more feel safe with his own self also, because she has stirred up something that will not change for him. Now he will have to examine him, he will have to find answers which he may not find, but he will have to search for answers to questions that he was avoiding for a very long time in his life. And that is also a question that is raised. Okay, one more thing that comes is the how society isolates people, okay, who are not successful. The woman who is the intruder has been working, she constantly talks about how she has been constantly moved from one place to another. Like till the age of 8, she lived in a place, and the father takes her back to that place to show her how it is being broken down. The society breaks that girl's memories, the good memories she has. She says the sink is, like hanging, the bedroom that she has used. So it's actually society also breaking that person's memory or connections to the society. the capitalism that sets in, completely breaking the systems, old systems, and therefore the connections that people felt with the society is also being constantly broken down throughout the novel. So she talks about that. She talks about how from 8 to 16 she enjoyed her life in that house where he lives now. Okay. And how after 16, with her parents' death, again how she almost becomes like a driftwood. She just keeps drifting from one thing to another. She says she tried different courses. She could not stay put in any one single space. Just like this man cannot stay put in a single relationship, but cannot commit to a relationship or can, take a relationship ahead. This woman is unable to stay put or stay committed to her own life also. So there is that kind of isolation that she suffers from this society. She says she even tried drugs, and then she was given a new name, but she could not stay true to that new name also. Even the new identity does not change her sense of alienation and isolation that she feels from life. And when she loses her job, again, for the society only supports her for a certain period of time. The government fails her, because after a certain point of time, the government will not even dole out the money that would enable her to survive. So she has to let go of her flat. She doesn't want, she's embarrassed to be in that neighborhood or meet people from her old office because she's become a failure. With nowhere to go, even she's stranded. She's almost set adrift on the sea, and she's left to take care of herself. The society is not a community that provides the kind of support that a community should. So the community fails her. This man self-isolates. She does not want to self-isolate, but is isolated by the society. So, by changing perspectives in the novel, what has happened is, so first you have the first person narrative by the protagonist, and which actually gives you an insight into a person who, kind of imposes self-isolation on himself. And then there is a third person omniscient narration for some point of time, after which, through the letters, we get to see the intruder woman's point of view, which gives you a different kind of isolation, which is enforced by the failing, economic, social systems around her, the political systems around her, which fails her, and therefore she becomes isolated and alienated from the society. So it actually, by bringing in three different perspectives, or three different narrative voices, what it does is also within the short novella give you an insight into the Japanese culture, the Japanese society, which is also failing itself. As a community, it is breaking apart. And this is something that has been a truth that many Japanese writers have been constantly talking about. But this is a French man, an outsider, giving you an insight into it, which is surprisingly very near to the truth of what even the Japanese writers are portraying about their own culture. Okay, so even if it is an outsider-insider view, the fact is that Eric Faye does a very good job of showing what the entire society's functioning is like, the dynamics of the society, how symbiotically it's breaking down. All of these has been beautifully brought together in this very short novella, which actually makes you think a lot, because there is a lot more philosophical ideas also that are being constantly raised about how she, when she's living in that open space for that few weeks when it is summer, and she thinks about what is the purpose of life. Actually, what is it that defines her? And she finds it disconcerting that constantly, she doesn't have answers for it. That actually human life amounts to nothing. That also makes her feel that she doesn't feel comfortable then being in the out. She actually wants to go into the security of a house, which will help her to numb herself to the reality of what human life actually means. She wants the material comfort. She lays out whatever little material possession she has, and she says that the factories which produced it might have already closed down. Despite that, they somehow ground her and make her feel that she has some sort of rootedness or sense of connection to this society, to the world around her. So, the dichotomy of how we seek comfort in a material world, whereas also at the same time seeking answers in a philosophical space. So how paradoxically she is working with both, and of course she has no answers, and her future looks uncertain even when she gets out of the prison. Okay, and even his future looks uncertain. We are not told where did he go. We have no idea where did he go. Will he ever feel secure in any house now? Okay, will he ever feel comfortable with his own isolation and self-imposed isolation anymore? all of those are questions that are left open-ended to us. We do not even know whether this letter reached him or not. We are told that it has to be handed over to this estate agent. We don't know whether the letter will actually reach him or not. But at least it gives us an insight into why she did it. Because she is trying to connect back to the happiest part of her life by revisiting that house. And the statement she makes that if I had any kind of political motive, it would be only I would only fight for the fact that anybody who wants to go back to their old childhood memory should be allowed to do that. So these are things that I find very fascinating about this particular book. And I think I should leave the forum open for discussion for people to actually talk about it.
Huda ma'am, you had something to join. You had something to say. You raised your hand. So.
I think when ma'am asked us about how did anybody feel disturbed, that is the time I wanted to respond to it. I think I think the most disturbing part for me was the kind of solitary life that he lived. So more than anything, it was, and then we saw degrees of solitude and solitary life, right, in both the characters. And I think that some of the concepts in philosophy like destiny, mutual brotherhood, and also I think this idea of kind of fate and how you kind of come into the world and you come into to the world with a certain purpose is all challenged in this novel. Like, do you really have a purpose to fulfill? You really doubt that when you read this book. Like, as long as you are not kind of being aided by the society who pushes you and who tells you that, like us all, you also have a purpose to fulfill. There is nobody to actually kind of ask you your purpose.
There is the entire sense of this thing is constantly there throughout, right from the beginning. For all the both the characters, it's clearly there, the sense of isolation, forced isolation, and something that is self-sought isolation. One more isolation that I see also emerging is the mundanity of life. Because the life has become so mechanized, and that's why the constant reference to the robots, the television, the kind of things that he watches on television are all related to robot. And even when he makes a reference to the fact that he calls up the police from his office and everybody just looks up from the screen as if they're also robots. So, and because Japan again is a culture which is highly reliant on technological life, especially robotic lives, many of them are now using robots to replace human connection. They actually have human robots that are used as boyfriends and girlfriends. Okay, so they live with robots and prefer to be in their company because these robots won't reject them. They don't have to deal with emotions related to a complexity of a relationship with a person. They actually hire robots because they can afford them, because there is a lot of technology available in Japan. They actually believe that robots are better, this thing against human beings. So you find actual incidences of people narrating, in Japanese news that I've read, where people are living with robots and prefer not to have human connection. So that's also a kind of future that he's already talking about, okay, which is already a reality today. This is in 2008. So he's already talking about that kind of a reality coming to, and it is already in place now, if you read more and more about these things in Japan now.
Gauri, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, am I audible now?
Yeah.
So even the part where he mentions that what is the use of making robots now, so that people everywhere are like robots. So robots is something which is something does not have any feelings, is isolated within itself, does not have any connections or such, and he is trying to compare that with the actual people living around him. So that gives a more strong sense of, how the isolation is seeped within individuals in that part of the world in Japan. And even when they talk about, cubicle homes where they just have an area to sleep, that's it, and that was sufficient for the intruder herself, because she just had certain very very few things that she felt were important to her, and that she felt, that she fit in her wardrobe where she lived. And for a year she felt self-sufficient, that was it. And she was supposed to, she was not she was isolated from the society, not intentionally, but she had to, because of her situations or all the things that were happening around her.
uh, there is also this concept that keeps emerging in the kind of, both of them are in isolation, but she finds peace in nature. She comes to that house because she talks about the view from that window. She says, imagine an 8-year-old having such a beautiful view of the bay, of the, all the books there, and even the church being visible. So
And
for
the
her,
sunlight
that
that
is,
comes
yeah,
from
sunlight comes. Even the time that she spends in nature, actually living in the outdoors, is something that she cherishes. Which, that kind of connection is something that the main protagonist never really finds. Okay, because his connections are all, in spite of his isolation, are all materialistic. So if he has to find his, what he does as a practice of, finding time with himself is to watch television, or maybe read a random magazine or a newspaper. That's all that he does. He does not step out and go for a walk in nature, or he does not try to look out of the window and see what it is. So she says, you may be blazed the view from there, but for an 8-year-old, till the age of 16, while I was growing up, that view was very important to her. And that is why she comes back. And even when, on the days that she's able to get sunlight, she sits in that room on the tatami mat, opens up the window, lets the sunlight touch her. On the day that he discovers her also, he discovers her standing by the window, letting the light hit her. Okay, so there is a different kind of connection that she finds. Those are the moments when she actually, you would think she's not isolated, she's not alienated, she's not feeling lonely. She's actually enjoying that moment. Even if she's by herself, she's complete in that moment because of her connection with nature, which is missing for this man. Which is why after his, fog has been cleared off, as he says, the fog is lifted now, he no more can feel comfortable. If he was somebody who actually enjoyed the view, he might have still felt comfortable even after that woman had been taken away. But that, the fact that his connections are so tenuous with the house, because it is a material world that he's observing, not a natural world that he's observing as a connection. That is where also the loneliness sets in, the connection, the alienation sets in.
I would like to highlight the point where he calls his own house to warn her. That slight moment where he realizes that his isolation could end, where he could warn her and probably talk to her, convince her to probably stay with him. And I don't know, this point just came into my mind where I was reading that part. It was a sudden strike where I felt that he didn't want isolation anymore. That's what I felt at that particular point.
Yeah, maybe more than isolation, it's just that his action of actually observing somebody, through camera, and what he has done now is going to actually lead to repercussions where a person is going to be imprisoned for a long period of time, and that is something he feels guilty about. There is a lot of guilt in what he feels
later.
Yeah, so that is also the triggering point of why he calls her up and tells her, wants her to get out of the house, escape before the police arrive there, because he cannot stop the police from coming, so that, she can escape. And that is something that I think most human beings will deal with. If you have a bit of sense of conscience, then you definitely feel that guilt, because she has not been stealing anything from him, only food.
True.
That's the only thing that and he's aware of that nothing has been touched except for the food. And that's the entire beauty of how paradoxical and how complex human mind is. And that's portrayed through so many small incidences in the story that even though it's only a 58-page novella, it actually carries a lot more thinking for everybody to do. Anybody else wanting to add anything to their observations about the novel?
I think that as I have read a lot of self-help books, and all those books focus on how we should be self-sufficient or find happiness within ourselves. But this book kind of shows the other side of being self-sufficient. So the question that lingered in my mind while I was reading this book was that, is being self-sufficient in
Yeah, that's something that is raised because actually we live in a community. The whole idea of self-sufficiency itself is questionable because the very clothes we wear, the things that we eat, the things that we buy and have in our house to be self-sufficient are coming from other people. Okay, no human being is capable of producing everything that they need for themselves. We actually rely on other people and we exchange and we barter and we buy, we use money now. So the whole concept of self-sufficiency itself is questionable, okay, in the truest sense. Yeah, emotionally we can say we are self-sufficient, but again, as a species also we are social. So the whole idea of, again, self-sufficiency is questionable because biologically also we are built in a way that we create communities. Okay, we socialize and we live together. So again, that is the social support, the kind of emotional support that we rely on with others is important for our social functioning and our survival. So, your emotional portions are completed by socializing with other human beings, by connecting with other human beings through empathy, kindness, compassion. All of these are important emotions for completing the social function and functioning as a community. And that is very important, where yes, individual self-sufficiency is important in the sense that you cannot rely on other people to live out your life, that you have to live out your own life. There is also a sense of you building connections with other people and helping other people also live their life so that they can connect with you and help you live your life out. So that sense of community definitely is there. And that is why he's questioning the Japan's entire concept of individualism, where isolation is the norm. How well can the society function? The society is actually falling apart. Japanese society has been falling apart for a very long time. Though it is not portrayed outside, it's actually been falling apart for a very long time. And that is what has been critically looked at. There is a critique of that kind of a society in this. Any other point anybody wants to raise? I guess that's it, Gauri.
Okay, so just to carry this discussion further, I would like to ask, any of you can answer, that how do you feel learning that this book is based on real life events, as ma'am mentioned earlier? So, because this is a real life event, what would be does anyone have any other inputs on this, apart from whatever has been discussed now? Vinay ma'am, how was your take on the whole book, the story?
Well, hi all of you. And I loved hearing Vidya ma'am speak about this book. Well, I'm not somebody who is I don't know. My take on this was slightly different. If in terms of that woman, I just wanted to give this particular thought to this meeting, that do you think that it was society that actually pushed her out to isolation? Because she basically, if you really look at her line of story, then she has not been treated well, and therefore possibly that isolation was something that was of a welcome for her. She was enjoying it, whereas a man basically chose to live alone. What do you think?
See, one of the things that she talks about is the fact that she's not able to hold on to anything. I mean, her relations with her cousins and whoever she grew up with, obviously, the fact that she was pushed into isolation, that's exactly what I said. I mean, when you ill-treat somebody as a society, you're pushing somebody into isolation. That's exactly what I was saying. The society failed her in that sense. I mean,
Exactly.
there is no support system from any other form. So if if the immediate family who is taking care of her were not supportive enough, there is no other social system available for this child to go away to or to move into. Okay, there is no social security available for her to move into, which would ensure that she does not feel so left out of everything. And because of that, she feels unstable and she just kind of meanders through her entire life. When yeah, so that is what I was saying, even then, that this isolation has been enforced on her. It's not something that she has taken. And I don't know whether she only enjoyed the part where she was actually in that out in the open, and she wanted security. She wanted to have a house. Okay, she was okay living by herself, but she still needed the basic necessities of life, which is a shelter, some food. She said she was eating food from that garbage place. Remember? So she needed food. So if somebody has to scourge for food in a garbage dump, the society is failing her at many different levels. So yes, so though she might, like I said, because of her open connection with nature also is something that helps her to enjoy that isolation, those moments of isolation. And those moments you don't feel that she's isolated or alone or lonely. Yeah. But the man definitely in his self-isolation also is lonely because he questions everything.
Because if you really read the story, then in between he does have a world outside his house, in terms of
Yes.
where he's trying to find out whether somebody is in his house. There are
Yes.
those neighbors who are basically, so he does have connections if he wants to go ahead and take them up.
And take it, but he doesn't. It begins
But
with in the first paragraph itself. He says that he doesn't like going out and drinking with his colleagues. That social connection itself is being broken down right there.
Probably
So
he's a little bit more conserved than the people who are like his friends. His friends are more, more social than him.
Younger population.
Yeah, the younger population
it's also population is more social. He is from an older population.
50s.
Yeah, 50s, and therefore he feels the disconnect also. There is the generation gap also that he feels.
I also like one more point that has slightly been raised over there, where she speaks about being allowed to go back to those places that she considered very, very, that was something very nice to think about. And I mean, we are not that old, but then definitely you kind of think of going back to your childhood memories.
The poignancy of that particular statement.
There was this one point which I liked the most, was his comparison of the screen to a bento box, where he had opened many windows on his screen and he was having his bento. Bento is basically a rectangular meal box, which is separated with compartments for each and every food item that is served to you. So I really like that comparison which he made.
Yeah. Lives are compartmentalized. That's also a representation of that.
Yes.
I think we are going to now close in. No? There is
yes, I think it's less than 1 minute. So I hope we could continue this session for a longer period of time. But I think we have covered most points, and I would really thank each one of you to be present here today. Thank you very much, Dr. Vidya, to be present today and sharing your insights with all of us. Hoping for more such meets in the future. And once again, thank you.
Yes.